in Asia where Brent is above $93 a barrel. You would have thought earlier in the week it had that very strong downward draft, but it seems allergic to $90 on Brent at the moment. So it bounced right back up again after last week's big decline. Let's kick off in the US this morning, as it clearly seems to be a place where there is some stress, at least in the administration. We had President Biden overnight giving a fairly major speech. I don't know if you'd call it major, but nonetheless, from the White House, always seems a bit major when that happens, declaring a sort of a war on oil prices, one might say. Mike McGlone, senior commodity strategist at Bloomberg Intelligence. Mike, your thoughts on the Biden speech, and will it be successful in its ultimate ambition, I would presume, to try and lower the threshold of oil prices?
Yes, I think he has been successful and he will be successful. And I think he's probably better off letting free markets reign. There's a pretty significant surplus developing if you include US and Canada production versus consumption, and just let that go. Now, releasing the SPR, could be considered somewhat irresponsible. But if you look at just simple inventory management, selling inventory into backwardation and buying back maybe some of those further out futures at much lower prices and just taking delivery actually makes sense. So if you look at the DEIS crude oil contract next year, it's around $75 a barrel. I mean, he can be replacing around the levels he mentioned right now by just buying some of those futures. But to me, this is also the big picture macro, and it's part of the reason I've been bearish on crude oils. There's an election coming up very soon, and this is very political. Makes sense. He needs to reduce prices and reduce inflation to get elected. The key question is what happens after the election. And what I see is a pretty significant demand destruction situation happening globally. And the US is just one of the least examples of that demand destruction. Although the key thing I'll leave you with is the thing we pointed out in June is unleaded gas demand in this country rolled over on a 52-week basis. It's actually declining at a higher pace than it did in 2008 when crude oil peaked at 145 and dropped to $40.
Let's welcome Amina Bakr, Deputy Bureau Chief and Chief OPEC Correspondent at Energy Intelligence. Amina, who's off camera on audio this morning. Amina, a few things I want to discuss with you, but I'd like to start with, inevitably, we had the speech last night from Joe Biden, sort of the counterpunch we were waiting for from the OPEC Plus announcement on October 5th. So 15 days ago, the US government has reacted with fairly negative response to the OPEC Plus decision. I've noticed in the interim period, you and your publication have made it a sort of meticulous exercise to publish every other country that has come out in support of Saudi Arabia's position. I'm curious as to why you've chosen to do that, and why is that newsworthy, do you think?
It's not just us, Sean. It's really all over the news. Almost all the 23 states issued statements in support of the OPEC Plus cut. And I think it's just related to the U.S. Reaction. It was a furious reaction. And we understand that even before the announcement, there was a lot of U.S. lobbying. And after they made the announcement, there were U.S. officials asking the group if they could delay the decision to cut by a month. Of course, there are questions around that, whether it's related to elections or not. I mean, it's an obvious point. But the fact that there was so much coverage is because of, I believe, is because of the U.S. reaction. And I think a lot of the OPEC Plus states wanted to form this united front by saying that it's not Saudi Arabia's decision alone. And Sean, you remember in 2020, where we had a very, very long OPEC meeting. It dragged on for hours. Actually, it dragged on for days because of Mexico. There was an objection by Mexico, which isn't really in context of the group. You can't say it's a major player, but when you have any player that objects to a decision, you have a halting of the meeting until it's resolved. But with this decision, it only took about 30 minutes for them to reach a conclusion, meaning that all the states were pretty much aligned before they even stepped into the meeting room.
Well, we also had, as it turned out, the Pakistanis and the Malaysians who have little to do, I think, with OPEC plus, and yet it seemed that there was a big sort of choreography beyond just OPEC plus members standing together to stand up on this position. Let's go to Dr. Charles Elinas, CEO of Cyprus Natural Hydrocarbons Company and Senior Fellow at the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council, sitting in Europe, looking at all of this. Dr. Charles, your thoughts on where OPEC plus versus the G7, if you like, this idea of who's going to get to control the oil price. You've got the G7 looking at this oil price cap, which is coming closer and closer to fruition, and yet OPEC plus trying to do the opposite. Is this a tug of war? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a kind of a war, but I don't think the G7 will succeed. I think eventually OPEC Plus will have its way. I mean, once it does settles, it looks as if also the major oil companies, one by one, carefully come in and point out the issues they're facing and the problems they're facing. Not only Saudi Aramco and ADNOC recently, but also Chevron intervened to start pointing the finger on Western governments and their approach to the future of oil and gas. So I think in the longer term, especially with the US, the news from the US that shale oil may even peak by 2024. Certainly production is not going up significantly. This year, it only went up by 200,000 barrels. All of these things to me show that eventually OPEC Plus will have its way.
Let's go back to Mike. Mike, the other part of the president's speech overnight, which is, of course, slightly wider than just the tight lens of oil price and energy price, but also energy security, looking at the sort of action of OPEC plus to curtail supply, but also the outlook for the Russia and the European embargo on Russian exports, that there is a security of supply issue maybe growing in the American. You've only 25 days of diesel availability in the US, which is border red lights flashing. Where's the energy security point here? And will Biden get a response from the American energy industry?
He's starting to sound like an Ayn Rand novel like Atlas Shrugged. Just let free markets, he'll do just fine. Because yes, there's an issue with diesel at the moment with refineries, but if you just look at U.S. natural gas has done, it was up almost near 10 recently, popping up similar to a fall in Europe, and now it's back in the 5 handle. It's just a massive excess supply of natural gas, massive excess supply of liquid fuels in North America. Just a question of letting it happen. And what he's trying to do now is just trying to let producers know there's a floor into the market around by buying back the SPR. But to me, the bigger picture macro is a lot of this is noise compared to what's happening in the macro of the market, with the most central banks on the planet pounding hard, with the Federal Reserve raising rates really quickly as the world tilts towards global recession, a depression potentially, and OPEC's doing in a way responsible thing. Their job as a cartel is keep prices high. They see the demand destruction, they're cutting responsibly. Now the key thing is, every time they've cut historically a lot, if you see this compared to like 2000, 2008, prices have gone down, because it's in response to demand destruction. That's the big picture macro. And we have the strong dollar. So let's be careful not to mix politics with what's happening organically in markets. And that is key thing to watch too, is also the stock market is just on the cusp of dropping harder, because you have a Fed that's pounding very hard to raise rates, reduce inflation. And the key thing that's left here that really potentially can drop to reduce this propensity to raise rates is commodities, most notably crude oil. Just look at copper, it's down 24% in the year. I don't see what stops crude oil from following copper down.
Amina, the decision by OPEC Plus to cut quotas, which is obviously the important point, 2 million barrels from its quota level, which is due to come into effect from November 1st, which of course is next month. What's, from energy intelligence perspective, actually the total numbers going to look like, the physical barrels likely to be reduced rather than the quota?
Our estimates indicate that it's going to be 1 million barrels a day, which is roughly in line that was, I mean, the estimates that were given by officials. So the official line was 1 to 1.1. We're estimating around 1 million barrels a day. And as you said, because many of the other producers can't meet their quotas. Sean, you just mentioned earlier that Malaysia has nothing to do with OPEC Plus. Malaysia is part of OPEC Plus.
Oh, it is part of OPEC
clarify.
Plus. Okay.
Yeah.
Pakistan isn't.
Pakistan
but
isn't.
the question in terms of the million is all of that essentially UAE, Saudi, and Kuwait?
Well, they hold kind of the lion's share of, I mean, they're the only producers that still could meet their quota. So yes. And overall, in terms of spare capacity, Sean, we estimate that the group would augment their spare capacity by around 700,000 barrels a day, which could potentially be used in the future. Because again, there's a lot of uncertainty around how the caps are going to work, what the impacts of the EU sanctions are going to be on Russian crude. I mean, our estimates indicate that the total sanctions between EU and caps might shut in around 1.2 million barrels of Russian production. So if you don't have enough spare capacity to cover that, I mean, this is again something the group took a move that helps, you know, build up that very thin cushion of spare capacity that they had.
I mean, I just wanted to follow up on the other parts of the decision that OPEC Plus made in the recent meeting was to spread out their meetings instead of monthly to every 2 months. And the agreement that OPEC Plus did agree at October 5th extended the current OPEC Plus, which was expiring in December, till the end of next year, end of 2023. These two factors. Any particular thinking around that, moving away from the monthly meeting first?
Well, basically, they wanted to go back to the previous model, Sean. I mean, of course, I mean, they have the flexibility to call for a meeting at any time. And this is something that they said. So we might see an emergency meeting at any time and tweaks. I mean, they're open to the idea of tweaking. And they even, I mean, during that press conference and shortly after, they did say that the current cuts are going to last until December 2023. That's what's the official agreement. However, they said that this could change, and they hinted even that, I mean, there might be an increase in production. The only concern is that with, I mean, I understand that the SPR release that was announced is part of the 180 million that was previously announced. The 15 is part of that. But if there are any additional releases and how the group might view that, as you described it, is it's a kind of tug of war. So I don't know if they will be open to tweaks anymore.
Charles, I wanted to sort of take a little bit of a broader view. Obviously, you have an area of focus around gas and LNG. The situation in Europe vis-a-vis this winter, where do you see the stress? Is it coming off? And we see apparently 30 plus LNG cargoes floating off the coast of Europe looking for an opportunity to offload.
Well, the stress is coming off temporarily. I mean, today and tomorrow, the European leaders are meeting to agree measures to bring the oil prices even further down, but they seem to be finding it very difficult to come together into a common agreement. And in the end, it could be just, again, the lowest common denominator. In Europe, stores are almost full. Recession is coming in a big way, reducing consumption. So far this year, gas consumption in Europe has gone down by 12% in comparison to last year, and it could go down by 15% by the end of the year. Winter is mild right now. Everybody's expecting some kind of a price cap to come out of these meetings of the European leaders. And China is using less gas, sending all this LNG back to Europe. All of these things, for the time being, are producing a strong effect on bringing prices down, having too much gas, But for me, that's the lull before the storm. So there are now
Is the storm this winter or is it next winter?
both this winter and next winter. So, for example, there are now forecasts saying that the winter will get harsher and calmer. Calmer means less wind, less hydro. So later in the year, maybe early next year, we're going to have a situation where wind power is not going to be up to scratch. Hydro is going to be less than expected. And guess what? Gas will be expected to come and fill the gap. And on top of this, the United States is saying that don't come to us to rescue you. We don't have that much gas. We have reached the limit. We cannot send much more gas to Europe. And as a result, all of these things mean that it may get actually worse. There is a lot of gas in storage, but storage was designed to deal with normal seasonal variations, not with these huge geopolitical changes and huge changes in the markets and so on. So the gas storage in Europe may not be able to cope by February, March. And if that happens, what happens for 2023? Where is the gas going to come? If the Americans are saying that we can't send you much more, the Russians are suspect, where is it going to come? So 2023 may even be worse.
Well, I think that's clearly tomorrow's headache. Let's get through tonight. First seems to be the challenge. Mike, I wanted to get your views with this growing noise in the US. It bubbles up. It's sort of historic, but nonetheless, has it got more legs on this occasion? The infamous NOPEC, the Senate seems to have some kind of cross the aisle support to give NOPEC an extra support potential at this occasion where the cartel, quote unquote, of OPEC would be in legal jeopardy.
Yes, well, again, it's political season. And 2 weeks away, we have an election, and everybody's scrambling to get elected, and they're just trying to find a common enemy. It's sad because this is a world that's changed. A decade ago, the U.S. was the world's largest importer of energy and crude oil. Now we're a net exporter, and particularly with Canada included, and with just a few pipelines, this is all solved. So I think this is just part of that noise that's going to fade away. And the key significance part of OPEC is 30% of global production. 10 years ago, they were 40%. What's that trend? And what's the key force that's pressured crude oil in the last 10 years? It's been North American production exceeding consumption, and the lack of the demand actually declining. So that's a trend going globally. And I think what Charles pointed out is just the simple facts of elasticity. We've seen a pretty significant crisis in Europe, and elasticity of demand is collapsing. And then humans will come up with ways to produce more energy. It's just happening in the US particularly. So I think the bigger picture macro is once we get past November is this situation where we have pretty significant plunging money supply on a global basis. We have the most central banks ever tightening, stock market down 20%, copper down 20% or more. And I don't see what stops crude oil from falling. The key point is if crude oil does not
OPEC Plus stops it from falling by continuing to try and cut, I suppose, restrain supply.
Cut so much, and the facts are when they cut a lot in history, when there's demand destruction, prices go down. The last time this happened was 2008. Before that was 2000. It's typically a signal they're acknowledging the demand destruction, and that's what's happening.
Amina, your thoughts on that, the resilience within OPEC Plus to defend $90 oil, whether they declare it or not?
I think it's
keep
not
cutting.
just it's okay. For sure, they keep an eye on the price. There's we can't even deny that. However, I think the bigger issue is market control. OPEC Plus wants to keep a tight grip on markets. Members of that group get annoyed when there are interventions from outside the group. So these cuts, sure, are to keep prices at a certain level, which might help the budgets of the members, their national interests, etc. But it's also about making sure that OPEC Plus remains as an efficient and effective market management tool in the future. And control is a big part of it.
And is that, I mean, when you think of that, 3 countries, even 2, UAE and Saudi, are they willing to carry all the weight on that? I mean, it seems to me that these countries, particularly the UAE, are fairly committed to increasing their production capacity, not looking to restrain it.
For sure, but they're also committed to making their oil relevant and sellable for the longest time possible. And for the time being, they see OPEC Plus as the vehicle or the tool that will enable them to do that. Whether that or it's going to change in the future, I mean, nobody knows. It's a good question, Sean. And if further cuts, I mean, if there's a suggestion of further cuts, whether or not that's going to divide the group, again, it's really difficult to say.
Let's get the survey question in regarding this sort of announcement overnight. Biden laid out a 3-step plan to bring oil prices down. Will it work? Yes or no? Some argue that it's worked so far. It's been somewhat hidden in sense of how much can you say the SPR release has contributed to keeping oil prices from heading up to $100 a barrel. Some argue it has. Charles, looking at the situation in the East Med, your particular neighborhood, given all of that potential demand opportunity in Europe, we just had the deal last week between Israel and Lebanon, maritime borders. That's kind of in of itself an unheard of agreement. It shows perhaps the economic opportunity that is being missed here. Your thoughts on the East Med, not in the immediate term, but we've talked about this over the years, and you've been relatively pessimistic about it ever being possible. Are we now moving from never being possible for the East Med to being maybe possible, probable? What's your thoughts?
In the longer term, I mean, Kadri Simpson, the energy commissioner, was here last week to inaugurate the start of the building of an interconnector between Cyprus and Greece. And she again carefully made it clear that Europe is only looking for gas, new gas, in the short to medium term, this decade, to get rid of Russian gas. But beyond that, it still is planning to move away from gas. And as a result, she's not looking for more gas from the East Med. Europe believes that the MOU they signed with Israel and Egypt, which facilitates greater exports of LNG from Egypt to Europe, not massive quantities, but more, is it. Beyond that, they're not looking for more gas from the East Med, and that's the message we passed. Yesterday, there was another economist conference here in Nicosia, and Tristan Asprey of ExxonMobil again also made it clear that East Med is not an easy area for them. They look at it, they are interested in it, they're trying to do something, but so far the finds are small, they are all over the place, and there are also geopolitical risks. As a result, they are not rushing into investing in the region, and in fact, they turned the table on the states of the region. They said, if you want anything done, you have to help us with investments yourselves.
I'm hearing from some sources, Charles, welcome your thoughts on it, that we just talked earlier about the stress really is next winter, maybe not this winter, given that much of this year did have access to Russian gas, but next year all indications it won't. But what I wanted your comments on was the possibility that Turkey could become a conduit for rebranded Russian gas as Turkish gas for next year, and that finds its way to Europe.
It's a possibility. I mean, it cannot be ruled out. Definitely, certainly, especially in this presidential elections year, Erdogan is looking for anything that will bolster his position, and working with the Russians and supplying Europe with gas sounds good, looks good. I'm not so sure it will succeed, though. I think there are limitations as to how far he can go. Certainly in Europe,
infrastructure limitations or political limitations?
Both, infrastructure especially. Increasing quantities of gas to Europe from through Turkey it's not an easy thing. There are probably small increases we will see, but not massive. And also in Europe, there is certainly a move away in different moves in different directions. There is an increasing return back to coal and lignite. I mean, talking about Turkey and its neighbor Greece is resurrecting lignite plants to produce electricity. Germany is bringing floating power generation plants using diesel, using oil. There are, and as I said before, Europe is cutting down gas consumption, and the plan is that the expectation is that the cutting down of gas consumption will continue into next year and beyond. So all of these things are pointing a slightly different direction and not necessarily more gas. But there is a problem that is developing we haven't talked about. The impact of all of these things is that prices of energy in Europe are still very high, and it's causing de-industrialization of Europe. Many companies are unable to function anymore, unable to be competitive. And either they're being enticed to move out of Europe or cannot continue. So Europe's industrial base, especially heavy industry, is finding it extremely difficult to cope with these prices, which are not
that's certainly
tomorrow.
That is a very, very big issue, and obviously over the medium term going to become a lot more pronounced, a bit like next winter is going to become a lot more pronounced, I think. Mike, I wanted to get your thoughts before we wrap up on the outlook for the US elections. I mean, how significant should we and the rest of the world be paying attention vis-a-vis, I mean, some of the things was that there was a certain narrative that the Republicans weren't going to get their red wave. Now it looks like they are. And the head of the Republicans in the Congress, McCarthy, and the House saying that he might defund the Ukrainian effort. Your thoughts on the significance of this election and what its implications could be?
Well, it'll be nice to get it over with so we can go focus back on what really is happening and get away from the banter. But there is going to be a red wave, and it always happens organically. It's just a check and balance. You have a Democratic Party, and when we get to midterms, we'll always switch back. There's just a significant reason for Republicans to do well. And the key thing that means looking forward to is what you mentioned, Manchin. It might have been Manchin. Is this McCarthy, but Mr. Manchin, he's helping with
West Virginia.
For the fact of going back to drill at will. It's just, that's the way it cycles. But it's the key thing that Charles mentioned. It's the most significant thing in commodities and oil right now is not supply, it's demand destruction, and it's accelerating and getting worse. And in particular, and even in this country, and the key thing that's never happened in my lifetime, I'm almost 60, is to have the world go down towards recession, particularly US, housing, everything, and central banks, most notably the Fed, pounding harder. This is really bad for prices of everything. And the key thing that's still sticking out is commodities. So I'll end with this. The Bloomberg Commodity Index was up about 40% on the year, earlier in the year. Now it's only 6% left. Where's that trend? And Charles mentioned demand destruction. It's likely to collapse and drop another 20% and mimic what happened in 2008.
Amina, let's give you the last word on demand destruction, bring up the survey result. I mean, where is OPEC Plus's thinking, OPEC, most significantly Gulf producers, where we sit, thinking about the demand destruction in China? Clearly another difficult year in China. The outlook for 23 looks not very positive for a China recovery. And China has been so central to the growth of OPEC Plus production capacity. Where's the sort of those two things meeting at the moment?
Good question, Sean. I mean, for the time being, I can tell you we haven't been hearing from any of the OPEC Plus members about current price levels destroying demand. So there seems to be no concern, or at least no spoken concern, about where prices are and its impact on demand, but they're very much aware that 2023 might be a difficult year. We might be entering a recession. I mean, you saw the IMF report saying that it might be the worst year with a slowdown in the global economic growth. So they are fully aware of this, but it's just hard to gauge how scared they are of demand destruction.
And just finally, Amina, it wouldn't be good to let you go without a view on the NOPEC. Again, it's the old chestnut. It flares up like a bad sore and then goes away again. Are OPEC Plus anyway concerned that this time it's more serious than the 20 other times in the past?
Well, it's gained more support, definitely, at least the rhetoric out there. I mean, you're seeing Republicans and Democrats backing it, and it's an item to be discussed. It's something that OPEC Plus members are aware of and will be following. But I really don't think that they see this passing. It's going to complicate the situation further. And I think yesterday there was even a headline. One of the wires was quoting an official from Treasury saying that the Russian caps are not going to impact crude from other OPEC members. So yeah, I don't think that they believe the NOPEC bill is going anywhere this time.
Well, perhaps that's one of the reasons why there was this clear choreography of political reaction supporting the Saudis and the OPEC position by all of the OPEC Plus and beyond, Pakistan, as we mentioned, to sort of speak out on this point, because there was a moment or two in the last week or two where the NOPEC bill did seem to be flaring up, that anger that exists across the aisle in the US Congress. And maybe that has been helped to be diffused by many countries saying this is an economic decision, this was not a political decision. And if you say it enough times, of course, that does break through the noise into Washington. Thank you very much, Mike McGlone. Great to have you. Charles Elinas, lovely to have you. And Amina Bakr, always better to see you, but lovely to hear from you. And thank you for joining us. And everybody have a great week, great weekend, because this is our last session of this week. And oil prices, as we said at the top, are trading up higher, resistant to that $90 floor and moving north towards maybe closer to 95 than it is 90 at the moment. Thank you very much.